I call the member for Aston.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I rise also to speak on the carbon tax bills before us. And I note that I'm speaking immediately following a fellow coalition member, the member for Right. And ordinarily in the course of debate you would have a coalition member followed by a Labor member and back to the coalition. But in fact there's no more Labor members, Mr Speaker. And I thought that might have been a mistake, but I looked down through the Speaker's list for today and no, indeed, there are no further names on the Speaker's list from the opposite side, yet there's still another 10 coalition members, and I know that there's a further 20 or more coalition members who will still be speaking on this bill in the days ahead. Mr Deputy Speaker, why is this the case? This is supposed to be one of the most important reforms that a Labor government has ever introduced into this country. The Prime Minister has talked about being on the right side of history in relation to this particular reform. This reform was going to lead us into a clean energy utopia, according to the government members on the other side of this chamber. And so where are the other 37 members, Mr Deputy Speaker?
Member Aston, resume his seat. The Chief Government Whip and member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The member is misleading the House. The government has been left with no alternative but to pull its speakers because the opposition keep calling quorums in keeping with their wrecking approach to the processes of this House.
There is no point of order. There is no point of order. He should know better than to raise a frivolous point of order. Frivolous point of order. The member for Aston has the call.
Mr Deputy Speaker, they're clearly very sensitive about this particular matter because less than half of the members of the Labor Party are indeed speaking on this particular bill, despite the reforms going to be so dramatically beneficial to this nation according to them. Mr Deputy Speaker, they are running scared, and I believe that the members on the other side do not want to come in here and state their support on the record. And so I ask, where is the member for Deakin, for example? Where is the member for Corangamite? Come in here and state your support for this bill on the record. But I can understand why they don't want to do that, Mr Deputy Speaker. But if they do not have the courage...
Member for Aston, resume his seat. The member for Hunter and Chief Government Whip. On
Mr Deputy
point
Speaker,
of order.
I appreciate the member is a new member of this place. But if he wants to launch an attack on members, he can do so by substantive motion. The member for Deakin, in fact, is overseas on important government and parliamentary business, and the member should restrain himself.
The member for Hunter will resume his seat. The member for Hunter will resume his seat. The member for Aston will resume his seat. I think those sorts of points of order are not called for. The member for Hunter, I'm sure the member for Aston will appreciate the comments in relation to those members that are overseas. I call the member for Aston in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, but the member for Deakin did have an opportunity last week to speak if he wanted to. But my point, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that if the members opposite don't have the courage to come in here and speak on this bill, then they should not vote on this bill.
Member for Aston will resume his seat. Now, the member for Hunter, on a point of order.
Appreciate, and I do this reluctantly, Mr Deputy Speaker, but I do feel a need to defend the member for Deakin. He didn't necessarily have an opportunity to speak last week because every member on this side, will speak on this.
Seat. If he raises another frivolous point of order on the same subject, I'll have no alternative but to deal with him. The member for Aston has the call.
Mr Deputy Speaker, at the last election there were 144 members of this 150-person chamber who campaigned on a platform promising not to introduce a carbon tax if they were elected. By being a member of the coalition, I made that promise, and the members opposite, by being members of the Labor Party, also made that promise. And of course, the Prime Minister famously said a week before the election that there would be no carbon tax under a government that she led. She did this on behalf of all Labor members because she was coming under pressure from the coalition, who said on multiple occasions that they did indeed have a secret plan to introduce a carbon tax. So she ruled it out categorically on behalf of all Labor members. There was no ifs, there was no buts. Straight down the barrel of the TV, she uttered those immortal words, "There will be no carbon tax under a government I lead." Had she said at the time, yes, a vote for me and a vote for Labor members will mean that we will introduce a carbon tax, then I'd submit, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Prime Minister would not be in her job today. So this bill that is before the House that I rise to speak on is based on a fraud. It is introduced by a Prime Minister who is only in office because of the express commitments to the Australian people not to introduce such legislation. Mr Speaker, we should honour the commitments that we made to the election. All 144 members in this chamber should honour the commitments that we made before the election to not introduce a carbon tax. And if the Prime Minister honestly believes that a carbon tax is the way to go, then she should take it to the election and let the people decide. Mr Deputy Speaker, let me go to the substance of this bill. This bill is designed to put prices up. That is the express intent of the policy. By virtue of it being primarily a tax on electricity and transport, it will flow through to the costs of almost everything for very little environmental gain. Let's look at the impact of this tax on residents of my electorate and indeed on residents across Australia. There will be a 10% increase in electricity prices in the first year alone. There will be a 9% increase in gas prices in the first year alone. And these aren't my figures, Mr Deputy Speaker, these are the government's own figures. There will be an extra 3% increase on government rates, on municipal council rates, according to the Municipal Association of Victoria, bringing average rate increases to probably somewhere between 9 to 10% next financial year. In the first year alone, the government itself says that it will cost the average family an additional $515. This is what we will get immediately, at $23 per tonne. But in a couple of years' time, again, according to the government's own modelling, it will be $29 per tonne. And then it will be $35 per tonne, and it will continue to increase all the way up to $131 per tonne. So it starts with a 10% increase in electricity prices and a 3% increase in rates, but it will just go up and up and up. And this could not come at a worse time for Australian residents. People are already doing it tough in my electorate of Aston and across Australia. And they're doing so, Mr Deputy Speaker, because the costs of basic essential services are going up well in excess of inflation or wage increases. So we've seen a 51% increase in electricity prices since 2007. We've seen a 30% increase in gas. We've seen a 24% increase in education costs. We've seen a 20% increase in health costs, a 46% increase in water costs, all essential items which are very difficult to reduce your usage of. Let me move to the impact of this bill on businesses and on jobs, and particularly on manufacturing jobs. In my electorate, we have a particularly large manufacturing base. There are about 1,000 manufacturers employing about 10,000 people. So my electorate in Knox will be one of the hardest impacted by this tax. And why is that the case? Because the carbon tax is, in essence, a production tax. It taxes everything that is manufactured in Australia, but does not tax those products which are imported from overseas. In that regard, it operates like a reverse tariff. It will penalise our businesses and add additional costs to our businesses here in Australia, but it does not add additional costs to those products which are imported from China or from other competitor countries. Yeah. I did not see the sense in this, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the members opposite say that this package is all about sending a price signal. Well, I asked the members opposite, what sort of price signal does it send if you make Australian manufactured goods more expensive than imported goods? The price signal, of course, that it sends is to go and buy those imported goods. Now, again, that makes no sense to me, Mr Deputy Speaker. And what will be the impacts on this in relation to jobs? Well, the Victorian Treasury has done some modelling in relation to this in Victoria, and it says that in my electorate alone, over 500 jobs will be lost due to this tax. Across Victoria, about 24,000 jobs will be lost. And I visited dozens of businesses in my electorate over the last few months, and each and every one of them, almost to the last one, has said that the carbon tax will detrimentally impact their business make it harder for them to operate, make it harder for them to employ further people, and put them at a competitive disadvantage to their international competitors. Of course, this would be bad enough to penalise our businesses compared to our international competitors at the best of times. But it is particularly bad at the moment when manufacturers and other businesses are doing it so tough. Mr Speaker, this is indeed the last thing that they need. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the member for Wright pointed out that if the rest of the world was going down this path, then there'd be one thing. But the rest of the world is not acting. Despite what the Prime Minister and members opposite say, the rest of the world is not acting. And the Productivity Commission has looked into this, and indeed it has clearly stated that Australia is the only country in the world to introduce an economy-wide carbon tax or emissions trading scheme. And if you go through and look at the largest emitting countries in the world, you look at the United States, it's abandoning efforts to introduce a cap-and-trade scheme. China, it's forecast to increase its emissions by 500% by 2020. India's emissions are growing at 8.7% per annum. Japan has delayed consideration of an ETS until 2013. In Canada, an election was just won on a platform of not introducing an ETS. South Korea have abandoned theirs. Even Europe, its emissions trading scheme does not cover the entire economy. Mr Deputy Speaker, we will be a lone participant in this regard. And so what will be the environmental impact then of us taxing our residents and our businesses in the absence of any global action? Zero. It will not alter the temperature in any perceptible way. It will not change the climate. It will not make our air clearer or our rivers cleaner. It will not save any endangered species. It will do almost nothing for the environment, for all this pain that I've been referring to. So let me summarise then in terms of what this piece of legislation, or what these pieces of legislation will actually do. If implemented, they will be a direct break of a promise that the members of the government have made, and that each one of us indeed made. It will push up electricity prices by 10% just to start with. It will push up rates by about 3%. It will make our businesses less competitive at a time when they are doing it tough, and it will cost 500+ jobs in my electorate alone and tens of thousands of jobs across Australia. And in exchange for this pain, we will get zero environmental gain. No wonder the government doesn't want to do a cost-benefit analysis of their proposal. It is crystal clear that it simply would not stack up. Mr Deputy Speaker, the government continually says that this bill presents the most cost-effective mechanism to reduce emissions. We dispute this statement, but equally importantly, they miss the key point that Australian reducing emissions is not an end goal in itself. It has no intrinsic value. It is only valuable if it results in a more stable climate or has other direct environmental benefits or productivity benefits. And as the government itself has acknowledged, Australia's reduction in emissions will produce few, if any, environmental benefits for Australia if it goes alone. So even if it was the cheapest scheme, and this is not, spending money for no benefit is still a bad idea. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is why the Coalition's Direct Action Plan is attractive, because it promotes measures that both reduce atmospheric CO2 and produces immediate productivity and environmental benefits. Carbon capture, for example, in soil is the centrepiece of the Coalition's direct action policy. It not only reduces CO2s, but it immediately makes soils more productive. Similarly, in relation to the planting of trees, which reduces CO2s, but immediately curbs erosion, provides additional habitat to support biodiversity, and is generally considered to provide positive environmental value by most Australians. Mr Deputy Speaker, and this is why the Coalition's Direct Action Plan is attractive to us over the medium term. It delivers real environmental benefits to Australia, even if the main global emitters are not taking action. Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill should not be supported by anyone in this chamber, other than perhaps the Greens member Adam Band, who was the only person in this chamber who campaigned on a carbon tax. To do so, Mr Deputy Speaker, would breach a promise that the rest of us made to not introduce a carbon tax and would cause enormous amounts of pain for residents, cost jobs and provide no environmental gain.